Hi everyone, this is Asherita from OneThingAlone.com, and today I'm chatting with author Michelle DeRusha. Hi Michelle.
Hey, how are you?
Good, happy to have you here. We had a couple technical issues before we started this video, so it's so good to actually be able to see and hear and have everything working.
hmm
Michelle's gracious. I'm so technically inept.
Oh, I am
Um,
too. So we're two peas in
oh
a pod.
yeah, the two of us. But today I wanted to talk with you a little. You're a writer,
hmm
an author of two books now. You wrote your spiritual memoir, well, your memoir, Spiritual Misfit,
hmm
that came out earlier this spring, and coming up next week, it'll be September 16th, right?
That's right. Yep.
You're launching, introducing to the world 50 women every Christian should know. And I want to talk to you a little bit about the power of story. What
Mhm.
what value do you think there is in reading other people's stories and telling our own stories, and why is that even important? Why, we're so busy with so many things to do. Why take time to read stories?
hmm Well, I'm a big advocate of women, everybody sharing their personal stories because I think that it offers the rest of us encouragement, hope, and community, a feeling of camaraderie that we are not alone in whatever it is that we are struggling with or whatever obstacles we are facing. I mean, to see that reflected in another person's story can be so empowering and comforting, when you're just feeling like, I'm totally alone in this. Nobody has gone through this before. I don't even know which direction to step in. And then you come across somebody else who has walked a similar path. It can be so comforting and also empowering, for you to say, my story is legitimate. My story is real and valuable, and I might be able to connect with somebody or help somebody else in sharing my story too. So, I mean, for such a seemingly innocuous thing, it can be so powerful to both read someone else's story and to share your own.
Huh. And you have experience with this because, like I said earlier this year, you wrote your own story, but
hmm
now you wrote the stories of 50 women throughout history. And I love how you write in both books. You don't just give the pretty picture. You share some of the struggles that some of these women had. Teresa of Avila
hmm
being a woman who became a devout nun and founded all these convents, but she started, I guess, not so spiritually.
Yeah, she was a little bit of a wild woman. I mean, for back in, 15th century, she liked to have a good time and go out in the town with her girlfriends, and she had a lot of suitors, people who were interested in having her hand, asking for her hand in marriage, and she just loved to, look fancy, and she had fancy hairdo, and she liked to wear nice clothes. So she was a little bit vain and a little materialistic, and she certainly had no intentions of going down the path that she did toward the convent and sacrificing, her own self for the good of other people. But sort of very slowly and over the course of her lifetime, God just helped her move in that direction and in the direction that He had in mind for her life. And it was a slow progression, but you can very clearly see it as her life unfolds. And I think that is a very powerful thing for the rest of us to hear, that like it's not all about instantaneous transformation, but things happen slowly in God's time, and even somebody that we know and whose name we recognize and hold up as a spiritual giant sort of has walked a similar path as a lot of us.
And that's so encouraging because I think I get impatient with myself so often. I mean, there's that sincere desire to be like Christ and to love other people the way He does and to live the way he wants us to.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I get impatient with myself, like I should have it all together already. And it's encouraging to read stories of other women who struggle, and even though they have a sincere desire, like it's still hard sometimes. And I'm reminded of the Cheez-It story from your memoir.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. I mean, that was just like a lesson for me in learning about the process of understanding and living out God's grace. Like it totally, I sort of thought like once I started um, believing in God that I would sort of be cured, you know, I would become instantaneously the perfect Christian, and so clearly did not happen that way, you know, because we are all just flawed and we make mistakes for our whole lives and for our whole journeys. And that's what I love about the women in this book, because they are all flawed too. You know, you recognize so many of their names, Amy Carmichael, Corrie ten Boom, and you think, well, these are like the famous heroines, the famous leaders in our Christian history and in our faith. So, you know, we sort of put them up on a pedestal. And when I learned about researching them is that they all had struggles and flaws, from doubts to, you know, insecurities to sinful behavior. It ran the whole gamut, and that was very reassuring for me.
Yeah, yeah, and I love how you tell the stories that way so that we can see them as real people. And the beautiful thing is that God uses flawed people. That you know that where He gets His glory from using people who are imperfect, and I think that gives hope to everyday Janes like us.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I really like the story of Katharina Luther,
Yeah.
Martin Luther's wife. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
after I read it, I like shut the book and I ran over to tell my husband. I'm like, "You won't believe it was Martin Luther's wife. She was like full of life."
It was. I know. I know.
But there's so much, like, I guess most Christians know about Martin Luther because he was such a pivotal figure in kind of the development of Christian history, but we don't necessarily know the stories of the women behind these spiritual giants.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, so I admit she's a really good example. We put her on the list because, you know, she's obviously Martin Luther's wife, so she was important. But I admit, and this is going to sound bad, but I'm going to put it out there anyway. When I first started to research her, I was kind of like, oh, whatever, Martin Luther's wife, like, big deal, you know, what did she do? She's basically like just his wife. And it was such an awakening for me to realize how much she did behind the scenes. I mean, she was they lived basically in an abandoned monastery. I mean, it was this huge building, and so she ran the farm, and single-handedly, they had a bunch of kids. They were raising her, I think it was her nephews or her nieces, somebody else's kids. She served as Luther's advisor in a lot of ways. I mean, he turned to her to sort of work through a lot of his theology, a lot of, you know, things that he was wrestling with. So she was his advisor. I mean, she was a dynamo, and I came away from her just like, wow, who knew, you know?
And she wasn't, I love that you pointed out that she wasn't afraid of challenging him on certain points, because she was a nun before she married him, and he was a monk before he married her. So they kind of like broke with tradition, and I guess in many ways their marriage represented their belief that clergymen could get married too. But she knew her theology, and I love that she was comfortable enough to challenge her husband, who now is like the Martin Luther, on like, yeah, no, I don't think that works.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think she was really fiery, sort of bold and courageous, and yeah, she would challenge Martin Luther, and would be challenging even of, you know, some of the people that, because he had constantly had people coming to their house, bigwigs, and, you know, in theology and in the church at the time, and they would all sit around, and she would be part of those discussions, contributing very much in her own right. So yeah, she had way more to her than I gave her credit for. You know, I was a little bit, I sort of had written her off before I even started, which is obnoxious to say, but it was a good lesson for me.
And I think we do that a lot, and that's why I'm so grateful that you took on this project to write about these 50 women, because their stories are so important. I mean, if someone wouldn't have that, like, I know there are other books that have been written about them, but you tell their story in such a straightforward, relatable manner where they're not these saints in picture frames that we can put on the wall that, they never did anything wrong or never struggled with anything. They're very relatable. And I think it's so important to read other women's stories and listen to one another as we tell stories, because there's power in that to shape and to give hope and to feel like, okay, I'm not the only one who has these conversations with my husband and who maybe like breaks that stereotype of the perfect submissive wife who's quiet and never challenges anyone on anything.
Yeah, that's true. That's a really interesting point. I'm actually going to teach a class about this book at my church, and in the first session, I sort of want to ask the women in the room, like, what's your definition of a Christian woman? You know, and you know, how are you defining that definition? Where are you basing that information? And then let's look at some of these women and see maybe where they dismantle that or broaden that definition for us, and let's talk about that. So I think that could be very interesting conversation.
Yeah, and that's so great because I think sometimes at least I'll speak for myself, not like women at large, but I know that I, spend some time maybe reading online or blogs or books on like, this is what a spiritual woman looks like, this is what a godly woman looks like, and it's a very rigid kind of stereotype of like, these are the things she does and these are the things she absolutely doesn't do. And it's so freeing to read these stories of 50 women throughout, I don't know, they span over 1,000 years, right?
Yeah, yep, almost 1,000 years, yeah.
Okay, almost 1,000 years, 50 women throughout history that God has used in tremendous ways to advance his kingdom. And they don't look the same. Like, each one has their own distinct story, and sometimes shockingly so.
Absolutely, and some of them impacted thousands of people, and some of them impacted just a handful, and yet each of their stories is worthy and valuable in and of itself. It sort of didn't matter like how broad their reach was, but how they were using the gifts that God gave them to impact the people in their lives and to further his kingdom on earth. It's just, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I would even go so far as to say, like, I think God is pleased, God receives glory when we can celebrate the lives of women that look different, and we celebrate that diversity and that creativity in who God has created us to be and what God has placed in us, and not trying to be like someone else that, maybe has been one of our heroes in the past.
Yeah, and I think too, even in our society today, 21st century, we fall into the bad habit of sort of pitting ourselves against one another, like we'll take sides, like women should stay in the home, not work, be the mother and the wife, and then the people on the other side will say, no, women need to, be out in the working world, and so it's like we're against each other. And what this book does, these stories, which I love, is that they show that there's such a broad spectrum of living out God's will and God's plan, within the home, outside the home. It's just very, very broad, and I just love that. So it's not like one or the other, but it's sort of everything. Everything goes.
And I love that carries over in life. And like you said, reading stories of women that maybe look different from our stereotypical spiritual woman, I think in a way gives us permission to then become that type of woman, to allow God to use us where we are, whether, we're in a career or in a power suit or at home in an apron or running around with kids, that God can use our story, whether it impacts thousands of people or, like you said, just a handful, whether it's our immediate family, that God can use that story and it can make a difference.
I was really enamored with Susanna Wesley as well. She was another of the women that I sort of initially approached thinking, okay, so she's the mother of John and Charles, and okay, so what's her story? What else did she do? But in exploring her life, I could see the impact that she had as a mother and a wife in that household on her children, and how that carried out, from her to her children and beyond through generation and generation. And it was really illuminating and enlightening for me to have a new appreciation and perspective of someone like Susanna Wesley.
Yeah. So I guess I want to ask you this: what, being an author, obviously you think there's power in stories. What do you think everyday women can do to help tell their story? To, not wait 500 years for someone to discover their life and then write about it. Maybe what are some of the things that these women did to preserve their story? What are some of the things that we can do to tell our story?
Well, definitely some of the women in the book kept journals, just personal, private journals, where they sort of worked out the obstacles and the struggles that they were confronting in their own lives. But also, I think for us, I think it's important that we be honest and authentic about where we are in our lives, and not try to sort of live the Pinterest perfect life and present ourselves in such an unrelatable and accessible way that other women, can't connect with us and can't relate to us. I've just noticed that when you start to tell your real, honest story, complete with all of its flaws and ugly parts, you just are amazed at the response that you get from other women who then sort of feel liberated to tell their story too, and to realize that we're not alone, we're common, we walk similar paths, and so that's just like simple communication, just simple connection and being willing to be brave and sort of put yourself out there with all of your flaws and not maintain this picture perfect persona that's just not real.
That's a good word there. I think it'll take the rest of my life to live that out, and that's definitely what I think will empower all of us to kind of be real and be honest and live authentically. Well, Michelle, I just thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to spend with me and work through some of these technical glitches and encourage me and encourage us to be authentic and to tell our stories. And I think the most powerful thing is to allow one another to live her story, to live their stories in ways that maybe doesn't look like ours, and be okay with that and celebrate that.
Yeah, absolutely. To respect and appreciate and acknowledge another person's story, even when it doesn't exactly mirror your own. It's still God doing His work through another person. It may be in a different way, but it is God doing His work, and we can appreciate that and celebrate it, like you said.
Yeah. Amen to that. Well, really quick, tell everyone where they can find you and where they can find your book.
Well, the book releases on Tuesday, September 16th, so just a couple days from now. It's actually available and shipping from Amazon and BarnesandNoble.com right now, and probably other places.
And I have a copy of it right here, so you can kind of see what it looks like. It's Great read.
Thank you. Yeah, it's pretty much available in bookstores and whatnot everywhere. And I write at MichelleDeRusha.com, so you can find me there too.
Wonderful. Well, Michelle, thank you so much for joining us today, and I look forward to the next books that God puts on your plate and the stories that He has you write as you encourage and empower women to tell their own stories.
Thank you so much. This has been really fun. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. You have a good day.
Okay, thanks. See ya.
Bye.
Bye.